So my name is Tom Schultz. Like Allison said, I am the director of the Marine Conservation Molecular Facility at the Duke Marine Lab. So I am a marine biologist and a geneticist by training, okay? About a year ago, I decided to make a foray into aquaculture, all right? And so I started something called the Duke Aqua Farm, or we've named it the Duke Aqua Farm. And so I was asked to give this talk today based on my experiences over the past year of starting the Duke Aqua Farm, okay? So I am sort of qualifying everything I'm about to tell you as being an expert in protecting aquaculture of my massive one-year experience, okay? And so, but even funnier than that is the massive one-year experience started 1 month before Hurricane Florence hit. All right, so you know it was an incredible amount of luck that this kind of went down this way. But I've learned a lot. I'm here to share sort of what our experiences were and kind of what I've learned, and then thinking a little bit about how we can protect aquaculture from sort of storms and future problems. The first thing I'll just talk about, what is the Duke Aqua Farm? What is this? What did we start doing? What was the vision? Okay, and so basically it is a small shellfish aqua farm that is located near Fort Macon. So those of you who are familiar with Beaufort, this is the Beaufort area. Pivers Island is right here. This is where the Duke Marine Lab is. And so very near Fort Macon, there we got an aquaculture lease that is about 0.6 acres. So this is a small farm. It's not very big. This is just sort of showing a diagram. It turns out, I'm going to trip over that chair. It turns out that the land right here was donated to Duke. So this is Duke-owned land, and we applied for a lease that was just off the Duke-owned land. This is the last house before you go into Fort Macon. So this is a national park that's preserved. All right, and so the idea behind the Duke Aqua Farm, though, was to give students the experience of getting their feet in the mud, to reconnect them with the environment in a meaningful way, in a way to sort of help raise, hopefully, some delicious oysters. And so it was designed to be an experience for the students and for the community as well. What does this look like? I actually love this picture. So this is the Beaufort area at Fort Macon and Atlantic Beach, okay? And so we have Pivers Island here. We have the Beaufort waterfront. And so the experience that we have for the students. So basically, this is Pivers Island. We share it with NOAA. We have the Duke Marine Lab right here. So we take our Duke Marine Lab boat. We can load it up with students, and then we sort of cruise around Radio Island. We go through the turning basin, and then we take a boat ride over to the Aqua Farm. And then that's where we are raising our oysters using floating bags. All right, and so my workforce is actually our students, right? So we get volunteer student work days. For those of you who are familiar with the Duke Campus Farm, it's modeled after the Duke Campus Farm. It's the idea of actually getting students out in the field. They're doing organic farming and at the Duke Campus Farm. For us, it's like I asked myself, what does the Marine Lab version of that look like? And the answer was actually oysters. And so the students, they, for the most part, love it. We've probably had about 20 trips out to the farm over the past year. I think over 200 students have actually been out on the farm. And they have a really good time. And so this is just kind of showing the workforce and showing some of the experience that the students have had. My colleague and collaborator on this project, I have an acknowledgement slide, James Morris, he has this thing, one of the things that he says, he's been raising oysters for a long time. He's been my consultant on this. And so his quote is, when you see someone enjoying an oyster that you raise, it hits you right in the brainstem. There's something about that you just can't replace, right? It's a really valuable experience. So during the first year, basically, we put out about 30,000 oysters last August that were about 1 centimeter big. And so this was actually taken in August with 2 of the students who were so excited to be out on the farm and in the water and having a good time. And so this was actually taken last month. And so this is what the oysters look like now. So in the course of a year, they've actually grown pretty big. And so the goal during fall semester was to, and I think I'm an academic, so I think in terms of semesters, right? And so the goal was to actually put out 30,000 spat in August. And then as these oysters started to grow and get bigger, we transferred them to grow-out bags. And then put the grow-out bags on lines and expand up to about 100. We were aiming for 100 grow-out bags. Obviously, Florence put a damper on that, and so we ended up with about 90 bags. And those are about ready to go now. All right, so this is actually a photograph of the farm, and this kind of shows you the area. I've had a hard time figuring out how to illustrate what goes into making the farm, and I found that my handwritten diagram was the easiest way to do this, all right? And so the 0.6 acres is delineated by 4 poles. The 4 poles have the lease numbers on them, and they're marked by yellow buoys, all right? And so this marks what the actual lease. We have anchors, which I'll show you in a second, that are anchoring ropes that run this way, and then we tie bags onto the lines that run 90-degree angles. And so the anchors are here and here, and then 2 more up there. So that's kind of the layout and sort of what we're doing, growing oysters in floating bags. So when we think about the gear, all right, so this is a picture of the signpost that's actually, so it's a 4-inch PVC post that is actually jetted into the mud. Those are pretty stable. One of them got knocked down by Florence. The other 3 were actually intact and pretty good, or stayed intact. And I didn't lose that pole. It was still there. I just had to go put it back in. The anchors I love. Okay, so this is where the work comes in, and I love this picture because these anchors are 69 inches high. They're radial disc anchors or helical anchors, 6 inches at the bottom. This is actually taller than my RU student, and this is driven all the way into the ground so that the top of this is below the surface. All right, and so the reason why these are important is because these are the things that are anchoring down when we think about a hurricane coming at us, right? So these are the things that are holding the farm in place and holding all the gear in place. And then the lines are actually 1-inch poly lines, so just showing you a picture of kind of what the size is of that line. And then we have oyster bags. And so the oysters are grown in these bags that are Vexar mesh. They have side floats that are attached to it, and so this allows the bag to float. Half the bag is in the water, half the bag is out of the water. So the idea is that you can come out, flip the bags, and so the bags will foul on the bottom, so you get lots of organisms growing on the bottom. When you flip it over, the stuff on top dies. When we think about storm threats, all right, and think about what's going on and thinking about aquaculture a little bit more broadly. So the reason I'm telling you about the farm and the way that we laid it out was so that you kind of understand that we were small scale and exactly what it was we were doing. And when we have a storm coming at us, what are the threats? What are we likely to lose? All right. So the gear type, when you think about different gear types, you can do oysters in floating bags, which is what we're doing, versus bottom cages. Now, bottom cages are growing on the bottom, and so they're fairly protected, right? They're heavy, they're on the bottom. You don't have to worry about them. Some of the floating bag gear that you can use actually have removable floats. So the removable floats allow you to sink the gear. So if a storm's coming at you, you have the opportunity to remove the floats and sink the gear. Barbara, are you aware of anybody who does removable floats? Yep. Is it more popular?
It's getting more popular.
Yeah, because in the advent of storms, right?
Exactly. Folks in Oakcroft, one of the farms that sank there.
Yep. So James Morris and I had a lot of conversations about whether or not to use the removable floats or the actual attached floats. The attached floats actually are easier to work because you only need to flip once every 2 weeks. Whereas with the removable floats, you got to flip, but then you got to go back and flip back because they're sitting out of the water because they're on one side. But it's also a lot of work to go in and remove the floats. So that's not a trivial consideration. All right, so the advantage of floating cages versus the cages on the bottom are, the floating cages actually raise single oysters. So there you're keeping oysters separated and you're raising single oysters, which are high dollar value. They're worth a lot more money in the shellfish industry when you go to sell them because you can serve oysters on the half shell. With the cages, they're growing as almost like a reef. They get cemented together. And there you're talking about oysters for oyster roast and things like that. You're not actually going to be able to sell them as oysters on the half shell. When you think about the gear, okay, and so this is why I went through kind of what the gear was, what's likely to fail? Well, so the big one is the anchors. The anchors are holding things down. What's going to, if the anchors fail, then you're going to have some serious gear issues. The other places where you could have failure is in the ropes and the crab pot lines that are tying the bags onto the main lines. So they could fail. Cages, the Vexar could potentially rip. And there are zip ties that are holding the cages, or holding the floats onto the cages, and that's another potential. But these things are pretty, all the gear was new, really we didn't have much wear on it, so it's going to be fine. And then, of course, I'm a molecular biologist out there tying knots. We know how that goes, right? James taught me pretty well, so we did okay there. Right. So one of the other storm threats, it's a big one that we haven't really talked about very much, but the idea of debris. So there's a lot of debris that washes up due to the storm, and that can have a serious impact on some farms. My colleague Grant Murray tells me that that's a big consideration in the Pacific Northwest. Debris around here, did you hear about any issues with debris in aquaculture?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, Jarrett Bay, big problem.
Okay.
That was one business in Skip Town, had to do that.
Okay, so debris is a big issue. I was more worried about rogue boats, so boats break loose and they get blown around in the storm, and if they get blown through the gear, through the farm, they could rip things up. Fortunately, that didn't happen. The other, you worry about there again, toxic waters running off from the estuary as it's coming down. I was looking on your picture of the runoff coming out of the estuaries, and my farm was sort of protected. Most of that water was going straight out the inlet and not going around to Fort Macon. So I was quite pleased about that. The other sort of lesson that I learned from Florence is that we have this really fun boat ride through a beautiful community, through a beautiful area, and it's really neat. But when the boats are no longer operational, now all of a sudden you're stuck in a position where you can't get out to see the gear or check out the farm. And so I've kind of been, access by boat, by land and by sea is what I'm after, right? Eventually I'd like to be able to have land access a lot easier where you can wade out to the farm and get out there and check on gear, especially after a storm. So siting is one of the messages when you think about aquaculture and shellfish aquaculture in North Carolina. Siting the farms properly is really important. And having situation where you can get access by boat and by land is something that I would consider pretty important. All right. So based on my vast year of experience so far, all right, there's two possible interpretations. So our farm, the Duke Aqua Farm, didn't really sustain any damage. When I went out there, I wasn't able to get out there for about 10 days after the storm went by. When I got out there, the bags had kind of flipped over on one side. So there's, line bags on each side. They flipped over on one side, but we didn't really lose any gear. And so and most of the oysters, we didn't really have any mortality associated with them either. So that was good. And so based on my experience so far, we weathered really well. But there's two possible interpretations. And Barbara, I cannot believe you stole my man. Forrest Gump is my hero.
What original concept.
And so we did not plan this, I swear. And so, you could make the argument that I gumped my way through Hurricane Florence, right? And it was just pure blind luck that none of my gear got damaged and nothing got blown away because I had the whole year worth of experience. But we did hopefully I've convinced you that it was actually A and not B, but I have to entertain the possibility of B. This is a slide that I'm wedged between Karen and Barbara, and I'm interested to hear their thoughts on this as well, right? Because I'm kind of somewhat going out on a limb, but there are a lot of pros and cons to aquaculture, right? And aquaculture in coastal North Carolina. And so I'm not going to, sugarcoat anything and say, oh, it's all good. It's not all good. There are challenges and there are risks as well, okay? And so this is just outlining some of the pros and some of the cons of aquaculture in coastal North Carolina. And people can debate these left and right? We could spend a lot of time discussing these, and I think it's important to think about them, right? And so, pros, they improve water quality, they preserve fisheries because you're not harvesting out of wild population. I see a serious pro, and this is one that's up for a lot of debate, but it actually potentially supplements commercial fishing. I don't see it as replacing commercial fishing, but I like the idea that it could potentially supplement commercial fishing. The commercial fishermen, they disagree. A lot of them disagree. They actually think that they see it as a threat to their industry. And so that's one of the really big considerations. So supplement commercial fishing. From an ecological standpoint, it creates a lot of habitat. We have a lot of fish. We have a lot of habitat that's created by having those bags and those oysters out in the water. All right, cons, they're again, threat to commercial fishing. This is probably something that you deal with or thought about quite a bit, but when you put in an oyster lease, right, you are limiting access to the water, right? So now boats are not allowed to drive through my oyster farm or through that area, right? So you have a public trust there that you are now taking away from the community because you have control over that, right? And so thinking about where you site leases, and that's actually a really big issue, right? And it also depends, so limit access. And then a lot of people consider the oyster farms and shellfish aquaculture to be an eyesore. So it decreases tourism in the tourist industry because they don't think it looks very nice. They don't want to look out from their $1 million view and see oyster bags. All right? And there again, whether or not you consider these things pros or cons really depends on your point of view. and considering the stakeholders. And so when you think about aquaculture in North Carolina, it's a complex issue. It's a complex issue because you have so many different stakeholders that have an interest in that resource, right? Whether you're a commercial fisherman, recreational fisherman, you're a resident, tourist, whatever. And so your perspective will definitely change how you think about these things. All right. So the other thing too that I was talking about with Grant Murray, my colleague, and it's something that we haven't talked about much, but, and there again, this is what got me tied on to the Forrest Gump analogy, is the idea that a storm can come in, when a storm comes in and threatens a small operation, they can't take that hit, right? They get wiped out. And then they're done. They can't recover from that. That's that $30,000 to $90,000 income bracket that we were talking about earlier, right? Whereas with the big commercial operations, they can take a hit in one location, but then they can they're able to absorb that hit, right? And so thinking about the small guy and how to do that and balance that is really important. The last point that I want to make, well, actually 2 more slides. The idea of sense of place. This is an incredibly beautiful place. We're out in the environment. And you look around, and for the first time that I've lived in Beaufort, I've gotten this true feeling of a sense of place, right? And that is actually really important. And I think that's what the commercial fishermen talk about. This is my home, this is my place, this is where I feel comfortable. And this location, you forget sometimes you're out there working on the farm and you forget to look around and actually get that sense of place and feel that. And I think that's actually really important. And then finally, I acknowledge my collaborator, James Morris here. He works for NOAA, and he has been doing shellfish aquaculture for a long time. Ken Riley has also helped me quite a bit and also works for NOAA. Many student volunteers. All right, and I'll stop there.